The crystal chandelier cast diamonds of light across the private dining room of Les Bernardin's most exclusive floor, where the Whitmore family gathered for their monthly ritual of conspicuous consumption and barely veiled contempt. Marcus Whitmore, heir to a pharmaceutical empire worth $43 billion, had just raised his champagne flute to toast his father's latest acquisition, a biotech startup that promised to revolutionize emergency medicine, when the universe decided to teach him about irony. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The piece of Wagyu beef, perfectly seared and worth more than most people's weekly salary, lodged in his throat with the precision of divine intervention. His hand flew to his neck, the champagne flute shattering against Italian marble, sending golden liquid cascading across his mother's limited edition Hermes clutch. The sound of breaking crystal should have commanded attention, but it was the silence that followed, Marcus's mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, no sound emerging, that transformed the atmosphere from celebration to chaos. "Marcus!" Victoria Whitmore's scream pierced the air as her son's face shifted from pink to red to an alarming shade of purple. The matriarch of the Whitmore dynasty, a woman who had weathered hostile takeovers and Senate hearings without breaking a sweat, suddenly looked every one of her 68 years as she watched her only son struggle for air. Richard Whitmore, whose pharmaceutical empire had saved millions of lives while simultaneously pricing out millions more from life-saving medications, found himself utterly powerless. His hands, which had signed deals worth billions, trembled as he attempted a clumsy Heimlich maneuver on his son. "Someone call 911, he roared, though 3 phones were already out, 3 voices overlapping in panic as they tried to communicate the emergency. But it was Elena Castillo who moved with purpose through the chaos. Her server's uniform as unremarkable as her presence had been for the past 2 hours, she had been invisible to them, as service staff always were to the Whitmores, refilling water glasses and removing plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that invisibility meant survival in spaces where you didn't belong. The worn medical alert bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she pushed past Victoria Whitmore. "Move," Elena commanded, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone who moments before had been asking if they wanted their water with or without lemon. Her hands were already positioning Marcus, her movements precise and practiced, learned not in the hallowed halls of Harvard Medical School, but in the crowded emergency rooms of Mount Sinai, where she had worked until life had forced her to trade her scrubs for an apron. The crispness of her movements stood in contrast to the chaos around her. Richard Whitmore, who had built an empire on the premise that medical expertise came with a premium price tag, found himself utterly powerless as shoved aside by a woman whose hourly wage wouldn't cover the tip on tonight's dinner. Elena's fingers found the exact position below Marcus's ribcage. Her stance perfect, her timing precise. 1 thrust, 2, 3. Each compression calculated and controlled. The sound of Marcus's first gasping breath was like thunder in the silence that had descended. The piece of Wagyu beef shot across the room with enough force to hit the oil painting of Richard Whitmore's father, the founder of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, leaving a small grease stain on the patriarch's painted smile. Marcus collapsed forward, Elena's arms catching him, guiding him gently to the floor as his body remembered how to breathe. "Keep breathing, slow and steady," Elena murmured, her hand on his back, feeling for the rhythm of his respiration. Her other hand was already checking his pulse, counting silently, her eyes watching the color slowly return to his face. The same hands that had been deemed only worthy of carrying plates were now the center of the universe for one of America's wealthiest families. Victoria Whitmore stood frozen, her perfect composure shattered like the champagne flute on the floor. She watched this woman, this waitress whose name she had never bothered to learn despite seeing her every month for the past year, save her son's life with the kind of competence she associated with the chief of surgery at the private hospital whose wing bore the Whitmore name. "He needs water," Elena said, looking up at the stunned faces around her. "Small sips," and someone should still call for medical support. He needs to be checked for any tissue damage to his throat. She turned back to Marcus, who was looking at her with the bewildered expression of someone who had just seen the face of God and found it unexpected. "Don't try to talk yet. Your throat will be sore for a few days." Richard Whitmore's hand went to his pocket, where his phone held the direct numbers of 3 hospital chiefs, 2 prominent surgeons, and the head of emergency services at Mount Sinai. But his fingers fumbled, his usual decisive nature crumbling in the face of having witnessed his son's near death and resurrection in the span of 30 seconds. The irony wasn't lost on him. All his money, all his connections, all his influence over the medical industry, and it had been their waitress who had held the power of life and death in her hands.
"How?" Victoria's voice cracked, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 questions. "How did you know what to do? How were you so calm? How did we never see you before this moment?" Elena was already standing, smoothing down her uniform, the mask of professional invisibility sliding back into place, even as Marcus's blood still showed elevated oxygen levels from her intervention. "I'll get that water," she said, as if she hadn't just performed a miracle, as if the natural order of their world hadn't just been fundamentally disrupted. But as she turned to leave, Marcus's hand caught hers. His grip was weak but insistent. His eyes, the same gray as his father's, the same gray that stared down from billboards advertising Whitmore Pharmaceutical's latest wonder drug, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her pause. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse but audible. Elena looked down at him, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Behind the professional composure of a waitress who knew her place, there flickered something else, a depth of knowledge, a weight of experience, a story untold. The medical alert bracelet on her wrist caught the light again, its inscription barely visible. Dr. Elena Castillo, emergency contact. "I'm nobody," she said softly, extracting her hand from his. "I'll get your water." She walked out of the private dining room, leaving behind a family transformed by 30 seconds of terror and the competent hands of a woman they had never truly seen. The chandelier continued to cast its diamonds of light, but now they seemed to illuminate different truths about who held value in their world, about where expertise truly lived, about the dangerous assumption that worth could be measured in bank accounts and pedigrees. Richard Whitmore helped his son into a chair, his movements gentle in a way his business rivals would never have believed possible. Victoria clutched her Hermes bag like a talisman, her perfectly manicured nails digging into leather that suddenly seemed as meaningless as everything else she had thought mattered 10 minutes ago. The youngest Whitmore daughter, Isabella, who had been recording the toast for her Instagram story, found herself with footage that would never see social media. Footage of her family's vulnerability, of her father's helplessness, of a waitress becoming their savior. The water arrived on a silver tray carried by the restaurant manager who had materialized as managers do when the ultra-wealthy experience distress. But it was Elena who poured it, who guided the glass to Marcus's lips, who watched with clinical precision as he swallowed carefully. The manager hovered, wringing his hands, apologizing for something that wasn't his fault, promising compensations that the Whitmores didn't hear. "The ambulance is 3 minutes out," someone said, Isabella perhaps, though her voice sounded strange, stripped of its usual affected boredom. "He's stable," Elena said with quiet authority. "The ambulance will want to check for laryngeal trauma, but his breathing is regular, no stridor, no signs of continued obstruction." The medical terminology flowed from her lips like a foreign language she had once been fluent in, was still fluent in, would always be fluent in, no matter how many plates she carried or tables she cleaned. Marcus hadn't stopped watching her. Even as his family fussed around him, even as the distant sound of sirens grew closer, his eyes tracked Elena's movements with the focus of someone trying to solve an equation that shouldn't exist. She had saved his life with the kind of expertise that his father paid millions to have on retainer, yet she wore a uniform that marked her as beneath their notice. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate, almost insulting in their simplicity. Elena nodded, already stepping back, already fading into the background as EMTs burst through the door with their equipment and their questions.
They answered their medical inquiries with precision: time of obstruction, method of intervention, current vital signs, and they looked at her with the same confusion Marcus felt. Who was this waitress who spoke their language better than most doctors? Elena's alarm pierced the darkness at 4:47 a.m., 17 minutes before it was set to ring. She'd been awake for the past hour anyway, lying in the narrow bed of her queen's apartment, listening to Sophia's labored breathing from the next room. The inhaler had helped, but the wheeze was still there, a whisper of struggle that made Elena's own chest tight with worry. The Air always made her daughter's asthma worse, and the generic medications were never quite as effective as the brand names, brands like the ones Whitmore Pharmaceuticals produced and priced beyond her reach, even with her restaurant employee discount at the pharmacy. She padded quietly to Sophia's room, checking the 12-year-old's breathing without waking her. The girl slept with 3 pillows, propped up to ease her lungs' work. Her dark hair spread like a fan across the faded Disney princess pillowcase she insisted she was too old for but refused let Elena replace. On the nightstand sat the arsenal of medications: the daily controller inhaler, the rescue inhaler, the nebulizer that Elena had bought refurbished from a medical supply store that didn't ask too many questions. The morning routine was a symphony of silence, each movement choreographed to avoid waking Sophia before necessary. Elena showered in lukewarm water, the hot water heater was temperamental and the super wouldn't be by until Thursday, and dressed in the black pants and white shirt that would hide beneath her server's uniform at the restaurant. Her hands as she buttoned the shirt were steady, the same hands that had once held scalpels, that had sutured arteries, that had pulled bullets from gang members at 3 a.m. during her emergency medicine residency. That was before. Before the car accident that had killed James and left her with medical bills that consumed their savings. Before she discovered that her husband's gambling debts were more extensive than their life insurance policy. Before the malpractice lawsuit, frivolous, ultimately dismissed, but not before legal fees drained what little remained. Before she had to choose between maintaining her medical license fees and keeping Sophia in the school district with the good respiratory therapy program. The coffee maker, a luxury she allowed herself, bought from Goodwill and repaired with YouTube tutorials, gurgled to life as she reviewed Sophia's schedule on the refrigerator. Soccer practice was canceled due to air quality warnings, which was both a relief and a disappointment. Sophia loved soccer, lived for it, even though running sometimes triggered attacks that left her blue-lipped and gasping. Each game was a calculated risk, Elena watching from the sidelines with an emergency kit that would put some ambulances to shame. "Mom?" Sophia's voice drifted from her room, followed by a cough that made Elena's medical mind automatically count productive or dry, shallow or deep. "Morning, mija. How are you feeling?" "Like an elephant is sitting on my chest, but a small elephant, maybe a baby one." Elena smiled despite her worry. Sophia had inherited James's ability to find humor in everything, even in the moments when breath came hard. She prepared the morning nebulizer treatment, the medication misting into Sophia's lungs while they sat together on the worn couch, watching the sunrise paint the Queen's skyline in shades of amber and gold. "Tell me about the cardiovascular system," Sophia said, their morning ritual of medical education disguised as conversation. "The heart has 4 chambers," Elena began, her fingers automatically finding Sophia's pulse, counting. 2 atria, 2 ventricles. The right side pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs, the left side pumps oxygenated blood to the body. "And what happens when someone chokes?" Sophia asked, and Elena wondered if her daughter was psychic or if news traveled even faster than she thought. "The airway becomes obstructed. No air can reach the lungs, which means no oxygen reaches the blood, which means the brain begins to starve. You have about 4 minutes before permanent damage begins." "But you could save them, right? Like you used to save people?" Elena's throat tightened. "Anyone can learn to save someone from choking. It's not complicated." "That's not what I asked." The nebulizer finished its cycle, and Elena helped Sophia get ready for school. packing extra inhalers, checking the battery on the portable nebulizer, including a note for the school nurse about the air quality concerns. Mrs. Patterson next door would walk Sophia to school, a trade Elena had negotiated with free medical advice for the elderly woman's diabetes management. The subway ride to Manhattan was Elena's transition time, when she transformed from mother to server, from someone who had once commanded respect in trauma bays to someone who was expected to be invisible. She had learned the art of invisibility well. Keep your head down, smile but not too much, be efficient but not so efficient that you draw attention. The other servers at Le Bernardin knew she had medical training. She had helped when Kevin cut himself on a broken wine bottle, when Maria had fainted during a double shift. But they didn't know the extent. They didn't know about the medical degree from Columbia, the residency at Mount Sinai, the fellowship she had been offered at Johns Hopkins before her world imploded. The restaurant's employee entrance was in the back, through an alley that smelled of garbage and grease trap overflow. Elena changed into her uniform in a locker room that hadn't been updated since the 1980s, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were sending Morse code. Her name tag, Elena C., was deliberately vague. She had learned that people treated you differently when they knew you had fallen from grace rather than never having risen at all. The morning prep was meditation in motion, folding napkins into perfect crowns, polishing silverware until it reflected light like surgical instruments, memorizing the day's specials with their pronunciation guides for ingredients most people couldn't spell. The lunch shift was business people, mostly, who wanted their food fast and their service invisible. They talked over her as she poured water, made deals worth millions while she cleared plates, never once making eye contact. But it was the dinner shifts at the private dining rooms that paid for Sophia's medications. The ultra-wealthy tipped well when they were trying to impress each other, and Elena had learned to be exactly what they expected: competent, silent, forgettable. She knew their names, their preferences, their allergies, their affairs. Richard Whitmore always ordered his steak medium rare, but would send it back twice, a power play disguised as perfectionism. Victoria Whitmore was allergic to shellfish, but would never admit it, always claiming she simply didn't care for it. Isabella Whitmore was bulimic, excusing herself exactly 23 minutes after the main course, returning with carefully reapplied lipstick and a scent of mint mouthwash. And Marcus Whitmore, Marcus ordered whatever his father ordered, ate without tasting, his mind always elsewhere. She had watched him for months, seeing in him the exhaustion that she recognized from her residency days, the bone-deep weariness of someone living a life scripted by others. She had noticed he had gentle hands, the way he helped his grandmother with her chair, the way he unconsciously straightened the silverware into perfect parallel lines, the habits of someone with their own forms of anxiety. The irony of serving the Whitmore family had never been lost on her. Richard Whitmore's pharmaceutical empire included the company that manufactured Sophia's asthma medication, pricing it at $340 per inhaler, of which Elena's insurance covered exactly nothing because the restaurant classified her as part-time despite her 40-hour weeks. She had once calculated that Richard Whitmore made more in the time it took her to serve their appetizers than she made in a month.
Her phone buzzed, the school nurse. Sophia had needed her rescue inhaler twice already, and it was only noon. The air quality had worsened, the autumn winds carrying pollution from the industrial districts. Elena texted back quickly, authorizing the additional treatment, promising to check in during her break. "Elena, table 12 needs water," the manager called, and she grabbed the pitcher, returning to the performance of invisibility. The afternoon stretched in the evening, the restaurant filling with the dinner crowd. She moved between tables like a ghost, present but unnoticed, essential but forgotten. Her feet ached in the non-slip shoes that offered no actual support. Her back protested the constant bending and lifting, but she had learned to compartmentalize physical discomfort the way she had once compartmentalized the emotional toll of losing patience. During her break, she stood in the alley, letting the October air cool her flushed face while she called Sophia.
I'm okay, Mom. Mrs. Patterson made me chicken soup and I did all my homework. Did you know that the human body contains enough carbon to make 900 pencils? Where did you learn that? Library book. Also, did you know that doctors in ancient Egypt used honey on wounds because it has antibacterial properties? Elena smiled, recognizing her own curiosity reflected in her daughter. I did know that. Are you using the humidifier? Yes, and I took all my meds. Mom, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor like you were. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. You can be anything you want to be, Mija. But I want to help people, like you helped people. I still help people, Elena said softly, though she wondered if carrying plates counted as helping. I know, Sophia said with the certainty of a child who still believed her mother could fix anything. You're just doing it differently now. After the call, Elena stood in the alley a moment longer, watching the sky darken over Manhattan. She thought about the applications for medical license renewal sitting in her kitchen drawer, the form she filled out every year but never submitted, the cost always needed for something more immediate, Sophia's medications, rent, the electric bill. She thought about the knowledge that lived in her hands, the years of training that now served only to make her the most overqualified waitress in New York. The dinner shift began with the usual chaos of orders and special requests. She had just served the amuse-bouche to table 7 when she heard the crash from the private dining room, the sound of breaking glass, followed by silence. The kind of silence that made her medical instincts fire before her conscious mind understood why. Her feet were moving before the first scream, her hands already preparing for what she might find. The invisible waitress suddenly becoming visible in the most unexpected way. The aftermath of the choking incident should have been simple. Marcus Whitmore had been taken to Mount Sinai for observation, cleared of any serious damage, and discharged with nothing more than a prescription for throat lozenges and a story that would have gone untold if not for Isabella's inability to keep anything private. The video went viral within 18 hours. Isabella hadn't posted the footage of her brother choking. Even she had that much discretion. But she had posted what came after. Elena's calm commands, her precise movements, the medical terminology that flowed from her lips as she directed the EMTs. Someone at the restaurant recognized the Whitmore family. And suddenly, Waitress Saves Billionaire Son was trending on 3 platforms, complete with speculation about Elena's background and demands to know why someone with such obvious medical training was serving overpriced entrees to the 1%. Elena discovered her newfound fame when she arrived for her Tuesday shift to find news vans parked outside Le Bernardin's service entrance. She pulled her jacket hood up and ducked through the gathering reporters, their questions following her like accusations. Are you really a doctor? Why did you give up medicine? How does it feel to save a billionaire? The manager, Henri Dubois, was waiting in his office, his face a mask of professional displeasure tinged with something else. Fear, perhaps, that the attention would somehow reflect badly on the restaurant. Elena, we need to discuss the situation. She sat in the uncomfortable chair across from his desk, the same chair where she had once begged for extra shifts to cover Sophia's nebulizer rental, where she had explained why she couldn't work Thanksgiving even though it meant losing out on triple overtime.
The Whitmore family has been inquiring about you, Henley said, his fingers drumming on the desk. They want to know why we have a doctor working as a server. I'm not a doctor, Elena said automatically, the lie bitter on her tongue. Not anymore. But you were. The internet detectives have already found your Columbia graduation records, your residency match at Mount Sinai. They know about... He paused, having the decency to look uncomfortable. The circumstances of your leaving medicine. The circumstances. Such a clinical way to describe the destruction of everything she had worked for. The malpractice suit had been filed by the family of a patient who died despite Elena's best efforts. A teenager who had come in with what looked like a simple pneumonia but was actually acute respiratory distress syndrome from vaping contaminated THC oil. She had done everything right. followed every protocol, but sometimes medicine meant fighting battles you couldn't win. The family's lawyer had argued she should have recognized the symptoms faster, should have intuited what the patient had hidden from them all. The case was eventually dismissed, but not before legal fees consumed what little she had left after James's death. "I need this job, Henry," she said quietly. "I have a daughter with chronic asthma. I need the health insurance, such as it is, and the steady income." Henry's expression softened slightly. "I'm not firing you, Elena, but the attention, it's disruptive. And now the Whitmores want to meet with you. Richard Whitmore himself called. Do you understand what that means? Richard Whitmore doesn't call anyone." She understood. Richard Whitmore had people who had people who had people who made calls. If he was calling personally, it meant something significant was in play. "What does he want?" "To thank you, officially. This Friday, before their usual reservation, he was very insistent." Elena felt the walls closing in, the careful invisibility she had cultivated crumbling around her. "And if I refuse?" Henry's look said everything. "You didn't refuse Richard Whitmore." The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. Friday, an hour before the restaurant officially opened for dinner service. Elena arrived to find the private dining room set not for dinner, but for what looked like a business meeting. Laptop, papers, and a tablet spread across the table where Marcus had nearly died 5 days earlier. Richard Whitmore stood when she entered, a gesture that seemed to surprise them both. He was shorter than he appeared in the pharmaceutical advertisements, but his presence filled the room. Victoria sat beside him, her expression unreadable behind designer glasses. Marcus was there too, a purple bruise still visible on his throat, his eyes tracking Elena with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Miss Castillo," Richard began, then paused. "Or should I say Dr. Castillo?" "Elena is fine." "Elena, then. Please, sit." He gestured to a chair, and she sat, her server's instincts warring with the memory of being someone who once commanded her own space. "We owe you a debt," Victoria said, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone unaccustomed to owing anyone anything. "You saved our son's life." "I did what anyone with training would do." "But that's just it," Marcus interjected, his voice still slightly hoarse. "Not anyone has that training. You do. You graduated 3rd in class from Columbia. You were chief resident at Mount Sinai's emergency department. You were published in the New England Journal of Medicine twice before you turned 30. They had done their research. Of course they had. Elena felt exposed, her carefully constructed anonymity stripped away by Google searches and public records. "That was a different life," she said carefully. Richard leaned forward. "We've looked into your situation, the malpractice suit. It was frivolous, ultimately dismissed. The medical board cleared you of any wrongdoing. Your record is spotless, exemplary even. So why are you here serving water to people like us instead of saving lives?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Elena thought of the truthful answer. "Because your pharmaceutical company prices medication so high that I spent my savings keeping my daughter breathing. Because the medical system that trained me also crushed me under its bureaucratic weight. Because sometimes falling from grace means you can't afford to climb back up. Instead," she said, "life takes unexpected turns."
"We want to help," Victoria said, and Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "We want to offer you a position at Whitmore Pharmaceutical's medical division, full salary, benefits, everything you need to return to medicine." The offer sat between them like a glittering trap. Elena knew there would be strings. There were always strings when billionaires offered charity. She would become the feel-good story they could trot out at galas, the waitress turned doctor who proved that the American dream still lived, as long as you were lucky enough to save the right person's life. "That's very generous," she said carefully, "but I can't accept." The rejection clearly surprised them. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his shock. May I ask why? Because I have a daughter with severe asthma who relies on medications your company manufactures and prices at 10 times their production cost. Because accepting your charity would mean becoming complicit in a system that forced me out of medicine in the first place. Because some debts shouldn't exist, and saving a human life isn't one of them. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was staring at her with something like admiration, while his parents processed what might have been the first honest rejection they had received in years. Your daughter, Victoria said slowly. Sophia, age 12, chronic persistent asthma, currently on Symbicort and albuterol as needed. Elena's blood chilled. You investigated my daughter? We investigate everyone, Richard said matter-of-factly. It's how we've stayed successful. We know about your husband's death, the debts, the struggle to maintain Sophia's care. We also know you've been writing prescriptions for other restaurant workers, technically practicing medicine without a current license. The threat was subtle but clear. Elena's hands clenched in her lap, her mind racing through the implications. She had helped when she could. Antibiotics for Carlos's strep throat when he couldn't afford the clinic. Insulin dosing adjustments for Mrs. Patterson next door. Emergency sutures for Kevin after hours in her kitchen. All of it technically illegal without an active license. What do you want? She asked, abandoning pretense. We want to understand, Marcus said, speaking over his father, how someone with your gifts ends up invisible. How the system failed you so completely that saving my life was something you had to do in secret, as a waitress, instead of openly as a doctor. The system didn't fail me, Elena said quietly. It worked exactly as designed. It protects those who can afford protection and discards those who can't. Your father's company charges $340 for an inhaler that cost $12 to manufacture. That's not failure. That's the system working perfectly for people like you. Richard's face darkened. We provide life-saving medications to millions who can afford them, Elena interrupted, finding courage in her anger. Do you know how many times I've had to choose between my daughter's controller medication and her rescue inhaler because I couldn't afford both? Do you know what it's like to watch your child struggle to breathe and calculate whether this attack is bad enough to justify the emergency room visit that will put you in debt for months? If you accepted our offer, Victoria began, if I accepted your offer, I would be betraying every patient who can't afford your drugs, every family destroyed by medical debt, and every doctor forced out of practice by a system that prioritizes profit over healing. Elena stood, her composure finally cracking. I saved your son because that's what I was trained to do, what I swore an oath to do. But don't mistake that for absolution of what your family's business does to families like mine every single day. She turned to leave, but Marcus's voice stopped her. What if we could change things? Elena looked back at him, seeing something in his expression she didn't expect. Genuine conflict, perhaps even shame. Change what? The price of medications? The system that criminalizes poverty? The fact that I had to watch my husband die because the ambulance took him to an out-of-network hospital and we couldn't afford the transfer to one that was covered? Each word landed like a blow. Victoria flinched at the mention of James's death, perhaps finally understanding that Elena's fall from medicine wasn't just about money. It was about a system that had failed her at every critical juncture. We could start with Sophia's medications, Marcus said quietly. No strings, no obligations. Just let us help with that, at least. Your charity doesn't erase your culpability, Elena said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Sophia's breathing had been worse this week, and the month's medication budget was already exhausted. It's not charity, Richard said, recovering some of his composure. It's an investment in you, in your potential return to medicine.
I work 60 hours a week between the restaurant and the diner, Elena said. I make $2.13 an hour plus tips, most of which goes to rent and Sophia's medical expenses. My medical school loans are in default. My credit is destroyed. My medical license lapsed because I couldn't afford the renewal fees and continuing education requirements. Even if I wanted to return to medicine, and I'm not saying I do, the barriers aren't just financial, they're systemic. All of those barriers can be addressed, Victoria said with the confidence of someone who had never met a problem money couldn't solve. Can you address the fact that the patient whose family sued me was a 16-year-old black teenager, and the jury was predisposed to believe I had been negligent because of implicit bias? Can you address the fact that my husband was taken to the wrong hospital because the EMTs saw a Latino man in work clothes and assumed he didn't have good insurance? Can you address the fact that every day I served your family dinner, I went home wondering if tonight would be the night Sophia's attack would be the one we couldn't manage at home? The Whitmore sat in silence, perhaps for the first time truly seeing the woman who had been invisible to them for so long. Elena had served them dozens of meals, had memorized their preferences, had anticipated their needs, and they had never once wondered about hers. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. Henri peered in, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. Elena, you're needed." In the main dining room, chaos was unfolding. A customer at table 6 was on the floor, convulsing. The other diners had backed away in horror, some filming with their phones, others calling 911. But Elena was already moving, her training overriding everything else. She dropped to her knees beside the seizing woman, quickly turning her on her side, protecting her head with a folded jacket someone handed her. She timed the seizure on her watch, noting the woman's color, the nature of the convulsions, the gradually slowing movements that indicated the seizure was ending. "Everyone back up, give her air," Elena commanded, and people obeyed without question. She checked the woman's medical alert bracelet, epilepsy, with emergency contact information. As the seizure ended, she monitored the woman's breathing, keeping her airway clear during the post-ictal phase when confusion would reign. "Don't try to move yet," she told the woman gently as awareness returned. "You had a seizure. You're safe. The ambulance is on its way." She stayed with the woman, explaining what had happened, keeping her calm until the EMTs arrived. Once again, she gave report with the precision of an emergency physician, and once again, the EMTs looked at her uniform in confusion. When the ambulance left, Elena found the Whitmore standing in the doorway of their private dining room, having watched the entire scene unfold. The other diners were talking excitedly, and I heard fragments, "The same waitress who saved the billionaire's son. She must be some kind of doctor. Why is she working here?" "That's why," Marcus said quietly to his parents. "That's what we're wasting by keeping people like her out of medicine." Elena walked past them without a word, returning to the break room where she sat on a cracked plastic chair and put her head in her hands. 2 medical emergencies in a week. Her carefully maintained invisibility was completely shattered. Tomorrow there would be more news vans, more questions, more attention she couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed. Sophia's school. Her daughter had been taken to the nurse's office with severe respiratory distress. They were calling an ambulance. Elena ran, grabbing her coat, not bothering to clock out or explain. She burst from the restaurant into the night, trying to flag a taxi, knowing the ride to Queens would take too long, knowing the ambulance would take Sophia to the nearest hospital, not necessarily the one that knew her history. A black town car pulled up beside her. Marcus Whitmore lowered the window. "Get in. We'll take you to your daughter." She didn't hesitate, diving into the car, giving the driver the school's address. Marcus made a call, his voice authoritative. "I need the pediatric respiratory team at Mount Sinai, Queens, ready for an incoming 12-year-old with severe persistent asthma, history of hospitalization, currently in acute exacerbation." Elena looked at him in surprise. He had not only researched her daughter's condition, but understood it enough to give proper medical direction. "I've been reading," he said simply, "about asthma, about the medications we manufacture, about what they actually cost to produce versus what we charge, about a lot of things I should have known but never bothered to learn."
The car sped through the night, running red lights with the kind of impunity that came with wealth and influence. Elena's mind was entirely on Sophia, but some part of her registered the irony. She was rushing to her daughter's side in a car worth more than she'd make in 5 years, owned by the family whose pharmaceutical pricing had contributed to this very emergency. They arrived at the school to find the ambulance already there, Sophia on a stretcher with an oxygen mask, her lips tinged blue, her chest heaving with the effort of breathing. Elena was at her side immediately, taking report from the EMTs while simultaneously assessing her daughter. Sophia Castillo, age 12, severe persistent asthma, acute exacerbation, unresponsive to rescue inhaler, O2 sats at 88% on room air, now 92% on high-flow oxygen, wheezing throughout, using accessory muscles. I'm her mother, Elena interrupted, her hand finding Sophia's, and I'm a physician. She needs methylprednisolone, 2 milligrams per kilogram IV, and continuous nebulized albuterol. She's had 3 prior intubations, so have airway management ready. Her last peak flow baseline was 320. She's probably at less than 50% now. The EMTs exchanged glances, but didn't question her expertise. Sophia's eyes found hers, wide with fear above the oxygen mask. I'm here, mija. You're going to be okay. Remember our breathing exercises? In through your nose, slow as you can manage. Marcus had followed them to the ambulance. We'll follow you to the hospital, he said, but Elena barely heard him, her entire focus on Sophia's respiratory rate, the concerning pull of muscles between her ribs, and the whistling wheeze audible even over the oxygen flow. The ride to Mount Sinai, Queens was a blur of medical calculations. Elena rattled off Sophia's complete medical history to the EMT who was calling ahead, her mind automatically triaging, planning for contingencies. If the steroids didn't work quickly enough, if the continuous nebulizer wasn't sufficient, if they had to intubate. At the hospital, she tried to follow Sophia's stretcher into the treatment area, but was stopped by security. Family has to wait outside. I'm her mother and I'm a physician. Ma'am, you need to wait in the family area. She wanted to scream that she had privileges at this hospital, had privileges, past tense, years ago when she was someone different. Instead, she found herself in the waiting room, still in her server's uniform, Sophia's insurance card clutched in her hand, insurance that would cover perhaps 60% of this visit if they were lucky, leaving them with thousands more in debt. Marcus appeared beside her, his presence incongruous in the crowded emergency waiting room filled with the walking wounded of Queens. They'll take good care of her. I should be in there, Elena said, her composure finally cracking completely. I know exactly what she needs. I've managed her condition since she was 3. I should be in there. You're her mother first, Marcus said quietly. Sometimes that means you can't also be her doctor. It was surprisingly insightful from someone she'd written off as another privileged princeling. She looked at him properly for the first time, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. Why are you here? She asked. Because I saved your life. Because what you said in that room was true, every word of it. Because I've spent the last 3 hours reading about the cost of asthma medications, about how many children die each year because their families can't afford consistent controller therapy. Because I've been complicit in something terrible without even realizing it. Before Elena could respond, a doctor emerged, Dr. Patel, whom Elena recognized from her residency days. His eyes widened in recognition. Elena? Dr. Castillo? I heard that you'd left medicine. My daughter, Sophia, she's the severe asthma case that just came in. His expression softened. She's responding well to treatment. We've got her on continuous nebs and IV steroids. Her O2 sats are back up to 95%. We'll want to keep her overnight for observation, but I think we've avoided intubation. The relief nearly dropped Elena to her knees. Marcus's hand steadied her elbow, and she didn't pull away. Can I see her? Of course, roommate. Dr. Patel hesitated. Elena, we miss you here at the emergency department. It hasn't been the same since you left. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and made her way to Sophia's room. Her daughter looked small in the hospital bed, the continuous nebulizer misting medication into her lungs, IV lines threading into her thin arm, but her color was better, the blue tinge gone from her lips. Hi, Mom, Sophia wheezed, her voice muffled by the mask. Hi, baby. You scared me.
Scared me too. The elephant on my chest brought friends, like a whole elephant family reunion. Elena laughed through her tears, sitting on the bed's edge, taking Sophia's free hand. Well, we evicted them. They're going to have to find somewhere else to have their party. Is that the man from the news? The one you saved? Sophia had noticed Marcus in the doorway. Yes. He looks less purple now, Sophia observed with 12-year-old directness. Marcus actually laughed, entering the room. I feel less purple too. You must be Sophia. Your mom talks about you all the time. She does? She does.
Says you want to be a doctor? Like she was. Like she still is, really. She just does it secretly now, like a medical superhero with a secret identity. Elena squeezed her hand gently. You need to rest, mija. The insurance lady was already here, Sophia said, and Elena's stomach dropped. She said something about out-of-network specialists and prior authorization for the overnight stay. The reality of their situation crashed back. Even with insurance, this visit would cost thousands. The continuous nebulizer treatment alone would be billed at rates that would take Elena months to pay off. I'll handle it, Elena said, though she had no idea how. Actually, Marcus said, pulling out his phone, that's something I can help with immediately. He stepped into the hallway, and Elena heard him speaking rapidly, throwing around names and terms like Whitmore Foundation and Emergency Medical Assistance Grant. Dr. Patel returned with Sophia's treatment plan, and Elena found herself slipping back into medical mode, discussing peak flow measurements and controller medication adjustments. It felt like putting on old clothes that still fit perfectly, despite years in storage. The new research on biological therapies for severe, persistent asthma is promising. Has Sophia been evaluated for them? They're not covered by our insurance, Elena said quietly. $30,000 a year out of pocket. Dr. Patel's expression was carefully neutral, but Elena saw the frustration there, the same frustration she had felt countless times when bureaucracy and economics prevented her from providing optimal care. Marcus returned, looking satisfied. The billing department will be sending revised paperwork. The Whitmore Foundation is covering all costs associated with this visit and Sophia's ongoing treatment needs. Elena stared at him. You can't just... I can, actually. That's one of the few benefits of being Richard Whitmore's son. I can throw money at problems. The question is whether I'm throwing it at the right problems. He looked at Sophia, who was watching them with interest despite her exhaustion. This seems like the right problem. We don't need charity, Elena began, but Sophia interrupted. Mom, maybe it's not charity. Maybe it's justice. Like you always say, healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. Maybe he's just doing what the system should have done all along. Out of the mouths of babes, Elena thought, and she looked at Marcus, seeing him struggle with his own privilege and culpability, and perhaps beginning to understand the weight of both. Over the next hours, as Sophia's breathing steadied and the crisis passed, Elena found herself in an unexpected conversation with Marcus. He asked intelligent questions about the medical system, about the barriers to care, about the reality of rationing medications when you couldn't afford full doses. I had no idea, he said more than once. Why would you? Elena asked, without accusation. Your world and mine might as well be different planets, even though we exist in the same city. You've never had to choose between medications and rent. You've never had to watch someone you love suffer because you can't afford to make them well. My grandfather died of tuberculosis in 1952, before the company became what it is now. He was a factory worker, couldn't afford the treatment that existed even then. My father built the pharmaceutical empire on the promise that no one should die from treatable diseases. Somewhere along the way, that turned into no one who can afford our prices should die from treatable diseases. It was the most honest thing Elena had heard from anyone in the Whitmore family. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just privilege, but also the dawning awareness of what that privilege costs others. Your father could change things, she said. He has that power. He has that power, Marcus agreed. The question is whether he has the will, whether any of us do. As dawn broke over Queens, Sophia finally fell into a deep, steady sleep, her breathing even and unlabored. Elena hadn't left her side, but exhaustion was catching up with her. She needed to call the restaurant, explain her absence, probably face Henri's disappointment at leaving mid-shift. I've already handled it, Marcus said when she mentioned it. Told them you had a family emergency. Your job is secure. How?
We're significant investors in the restaurant group. Henri was very understanding once I explained the situation. The casual display of influence should have bothered her, but Elena was too tired to care. Her daughter was breathing. Everything else could wait. "I should go," Marcus said, standing. "But I'd like to continue this conversation. What you said yesterday about the system. Someone needs to hear it. My father needs to hear it." "Your father doesn't want to hear it." "No," Marcus agreed, "but he needs to anyway. The question is how to make him listen." He left his card on the bedside table. Not a business card, but a personal one. Just his name and cell phone number. "When Sophia's feeling better, when you're ready, call me. We need to talk about change. Real change, not just charity." After he left, Elena sat watching her daughter sleep, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been invisible. Now, she was at the center of something she didn't fully understand, caught between her old life and her current one, between what she had been and what she had been forced to become. Sophia stirred, her hand finding Elena's. "Mom? I'm here. The man, Marcus, he seems nice." "He seems to be trying," Elena said carefully. "That's something, isn't it? Trying?" Elena thought about all the ways trying wasn't enough, all the systemic barriers that good intentions couldn't overcome. But she also thought about Marcus's questions, his genuine horror at learning about medical rationing, his use of his influence to help rather than harm. "It's something," she agreed. The hospital's morning shift was arriving, and through the window, Elena could see the sunrise painting the New York skyline in shades of gold and pink. It was a new day, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sure what role she would play in it. The invisible server, the forgotten doctor, or something else entirely. Something that bridged both worlds and might, possibly, make a difference. The video that changed everything wasn't the one of Elena saving Marcus at the restaurant. It was the security footage from Mount Sinai, Queens, that someone leaked 3 days after Sophia's hospitalization. It showed Elena in the emergency department, still in her server's uniform, directing trauma responses with the kind of authority that came from years of experience, speaking in rapid medical terminology while simultaneously comforting her daughter. It showed her recognizing the signs of an incoming cardiac event in another patient in the waiting room, alerting staff before the man collapsed. It showed her teaching a resident the proper technique for pediatric IV insertion when he struggled with Sophia's small veins. The video went viral with different headlines. Billionaire's Waitress was chief of emergency medicine at Mount Sinai. Elena discovered the extent of the revelation when she arrived at her Queens apartment after Sophia's discharge to find reporters camped outside her building. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, met her at the entrance with a garbage bag. "I've been telling them you're not home, but they keep coming back. That nice young man from the news, the one with the good hair, he's been here 3 times. Elena wrapped Sophia closer, using her body to shield her daughter from the cameras as they pushed through. Questions flew at them like arrows. "Dr. Castillo, why did you leave medicine? Is it true you were blacklisted after the malpractice suit? How does it feel to serve food to the people whose policies kept you from practicing? What's your response to the medical board statement?"
That last question made Elena pause. What statement? The reporter, sensing an opening, pushed closer. The New York State Medical Board released a statement this morning saying they're reviewing your case for potential reinstatement. They're calling it exceptional circumstances. Elena's key shook as she unlocked the building door, ushering Sophia inside. The medical board hadn't contacted her. They were making public statements about her life without even consulting her. It was another form of the same systemic disregard that had driven her from medicine in the first place. Inside their apartment, Sophia immediately went to the window, peering down at the crowd. "We're famous," she said, with a mix of wonder and worry. "Infamous, maybe," Elena corrected, already checking her phone.
She had 47 missed calls, over 100 text messages, and her email inbox showed 500-plus unread messages. Her voicemail was full. Among the chaos, one message stood out. A text from Marcus. "I'm sorry about the leak. It didn't come from us. Dad wants to meet with you. Not at the restaurant. Somewhere private. This has become bigger than any of us expected." Elena was about to respond when her phone rang. Henri's name appeared on the screen. "Elena, I'm sorry to do this over the phone," he began, and she knew immediately where this was going. "The attention has become problematic for our other guests. They come to Le Bernardin for discretion, for privacy, with the media camping outside." "You're firing me." "I'm suggesting a leave of absence until things calm down." "Paid?" His silence was answer enough. "I understand," Elena said, though understanding and accepting were different things. "I'll come get my things when we'll mail them to you. It's just better this way." After she hung up, Elena sat on their worn couch, the weight of their situation crashing down. Without the restaurant job, she had only her weekend diner shifts, which barely covered groceries. Rent was due in a week. Sophia's medications needed refilling. "Mom?" Sophia sat beside her, still wheezing slightly from the recent attack. "Are we going to be okay?" "We're always okay," Elena said, pulling her close. "We figure it out." "Maybe you should talk to that Marcus guy. He seemed like he wanted to help." Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door. She looked through the peephole to find not a reporter, but a woman in an expensive suit holding a leather portfolio. "Dr. Castillo? My name is Jennifer Huang. I'm a partner at Huang, Martinez & Associates. We specialize in medical malpractice defense and healthcare law. I'd like to discuss representing you." "I can't afford a lawyer." "You can't afford not to have one. May I come in? I promise this conversation won't cost you anything." Against her better judgment, Elena let her in. Jennifer Huang moved through their small apartment without a trace of the judgment Elena expected, settling into their kitchen chair as if she belonged there. "I've reviewed your case," Jennifer began, without preamble. "The original malpractice suit, your husband's death, the systematic discrimination you faced. You have grounds for multiple lawsuits. Wrongful death against the hospital that delayed your husband's treatment. Discrimination in the handling of your malpractice case. Potentially even a case against Whitmore Pharmaceuticals for price fixing on essential medications." "I don't want to sue anyone," Elena said. "I just want to take care of my daughter." "And how's that working out?" Jennifer's tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "You're one of the most talented emergency physicians of your generation, and we're serving, overpriced food to people who wouldn't notice if you disappeared tomorrow. The system failed you, Dr. Castillo. I'm offering you a chance to fight back." "Who's paying you?" Jennifer smiled. "That's the interesting part. I received a retainer from an anonymous benefactor who wants to see you reinstated to medicine. The only condition is that you pursue your medical license renewal." Elena's mind raced through possibilities. The Whitmores seemed obvious, but this didn't feel like Richard's style. Marcus, perhaps, or someone entirely else. "I need to think about it." Jennifer left her card, the same elegant cardstock that marked her as someone who operated in a different world. After she left, Elena sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and past-due notices, and tried to see a path forward that didn't involve accepting charity from people whose wealth came from others' suffering.
Her phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Patel from Mount Sinai. "Elena, I'm calling unofficially. The hospital board had an emergency meeting this morning. The footage of you in the ED, it's caused quite a stir. They're discussing offering you a position." "I don't have an active license." "They're willing to sponsor your reinstatement, pay for the fees, the continuing education, everything. Elena, we need you. The ED needs you. You never should have had to leave." The irony was almost too much. For 3 years, she had been invisible, struggling,
drowning in debt while working 2 jobs. Now, because she had saved the right person at the right time, suddenly everyone wanted to help. "Can I ask you something, Raj?" she said, using his first name for the first time since her residency. "Where was this offer when I was fighting the malpractice suit? Where was the hospital support when I couldn't afford to renew my license? Where was this need for my skills when I was applying for jobs and being turned away?" His silence spoke volumes. "I'll think about it," she said, ending the call. Sophia had fallen asleep on the couch, her breathing still slightly labored, despite the medications. Elena covered her with a blanket, then stood at their window, looking down at the reporters still gathered below. Her phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. "Please, we need to talk. This is spiraling beyond what any of us intended." She texted back, "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the diner on Steinway Street. Come alone." The next morning brought more revelations. Someone had created a Wikipedia page for her. The malpractice case had been reopened for review. Not the verdict, which had been in her favor, but the handling of it. Questions were being raised about why a cleared physician had been unable to return to practice, about the barriers that existed even after exoneration. More significantly, someone had leaked Whitmore Pharmaceutical's internal pricing documents for asthma medications showing a markup of over 2,800% from production cost to retail price. The leak was being attributed to a whistleblower within the company, and speculation was rampant that Elena's story had inspired someone to act. The diner on Steinway Street was Elena's other job, a 24-hour Greek place where she worked weekend overnight shifts. The owner, Dmitri, had given her work when no one else would, paying cash under the table when she couldn't provide proper documentation because her life was falling apart. He greeted her warmly when she arrived, ignoring the reporters who had followed her. "You want your usual booth?" "Please, I'm meeting someone." Marcus arrived precisely at 2 p.m., looking as out of place in the vinyl booth as a peacock in a pigeon coop. He had tried to dress down, jeans and the button-down shirt, but the watch on his wrist probably cost more than the diner made in a month. "Thank you for meeting me," he began. "Your family cost me my job. The attention cost you your job. Attention you have because you saved my life." He paused. "I've been thinking about that, about how no good deed goes unpunished in our society. You did everything right and you're being punished for it. Story of my life." Marcus pulled out a tablet, sliding it across to her. On the screen was a document titled The Whitmore Medical Justice Initiative. "What is this?" "It's a proposal I'm presenting to the board next week. A complete restructuring of our pricing model for essential medications, particularly those for chronic conditions like asthma. A fund for physicians who have been forced out of practice due to systemic failures, and a program to provide free medications to families who can't afford them. Not charity, not tax write-offs, but a recognition that healthcare is a human right." Elena read through the proposal, her medical mind automatically checking the numbers, the feasibility, the scope. It was ambitious, potentially revolutionary, and almost certainly doomed. "Your father will never agree to this."
My father is currently dealing with the fact that someone inside our company leaked those pricing documents. Someone who has access to the highest levels of our internal systems, someone he trusts implicitly. Elena looked at him sharply. "You?" Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. "I couldn't say. But I can tell you that the board is panicking. Our stock has dropped 12% in 3 days. We're facing congressional inquiries. And at the center of it all is the story of a brilliant physician reduced to serving water because she couldn't afford to keep her daughter breathing with medications we price at criminal margins. So I'm a PR problem you need to solve." "You're a wake-up call," Marcus corrected. "One I apparently needed. Do you know what I've been doing for the past week? Reading. Medical journals, patient stories, bankruptcy filings related to medical debt. Did you know that 62% of personal bankruptcies are related to medical bills? That people are dying from rationing insulin, a drug that's been around for 100 years?
I know, Elena said quietly. I've seen them die. I hadn't. I had insulated myself completely from the human cost of our business model. Until you. Until I watched you save my life with skills you're not allowed to use, then learned you can barely save your daughter's life because of prices my family sets. Dmitri approached with coffee, eyeing Marcus suspiciously. You need anything, Elena? You let me know, he said pointedly. After he left, Marcus continued. We want to offer you something. Not charity, not a handout, but a position. Chief Medical Advisor for the Whitmore Medical Justice Initiative. Full salary, complete benefits, and most importantly, the power to actually change things, to ensure our medications are priced ethically, to oversee the physician restoration program, to be the conscience we've clearly been lacking. And in exchange, I become the face of Whitmore Pharmaceutical's redemption arc. In exchange, you get to practice medicine again, ensure Sophia has everything she needs, and potentially change the system that failed you. Eleva sat back, studying him. Why do you care? Really? This isn't just about me saving your life. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of a young boy. My nephew. My sister's son. He has type 1 diabetes. Isabella never told our parents, but she's been secretly paying for insulin for 3 other children in his class whose families can't afford it. She's been doing it for 2 years, using her trust fund. She says she learned it from watching you. Watching me? You don't remember, but about 18 months ago, you helped a dishwasher at the restaurant. His son had diabetes, was rationing insulin. You connected him with a patient assistance program, helped him navigate the paperwork. Isabella overheard. It planted a seed. I do remember. Carlos's son, Miguel, 16 years old, trying to make 1 vial of insulin last 3 times longer than it should. I had spent hours on my day off helping them apply for programs, teaching them how to work the system. Your sister could do so much more if she went public, if she challenged your father directly. She's 23 and terrified of him, but she's watching what happens with you. We all are. The employees who leaked those documents, the board members who are privately supporting my initiative, even my mother, though she'd never admitted. You've become something of a symbol, Dr. Castillo. I didn't ask to be a symbol. No one ever does. But here we are. Elena's phone buzzed. It was a message from Jennifer Huang. Medical board has fast-tracked your reinstatement hearing, Thursday, 10 a.m. I'll be there with you. I haven't agreed to representation. The retainer has been paid regardless. You might as well use it. Elena looked back at Marcus. Did you pay for the lawyer? Would it matter if I did? Yes. Then no, I didn't, though I have my suspicions about who did. He glanced meaningfully at the kitchen, where Dmitri was aggressively cleaning already clean surfaces while keeping an eye on them. Dmitri doesn't have that kind of money.
But the community does. Do you have any idea how many people you've helped over the years? How many restaurant workers, neighbors, strangers you've treated for free? They remember, Elena. They've been organizing, fundraising. There's a GoFundMe for your legal fees that's already raised $40,000. Elena grabbed his phone, searching for her name. The fundraising page appeared, titled, Help Dr. Elena Castillo Return to Medicine. The comment section was filled with stories, people she had helped, lives she had saved or improved, families grateful for her intervention. She recognized some names, but most were strangers, people who had heard her story and saw in it their own struggles with the medical system. I can't accept this, she said, overwhelmed. Why not? You spent 3 years giving to everyone else. Maybe it's time to let them give back. Her phone rang.
It was Sophia's school. Ms. Castillo? Sophia is fine, the nurse said quickly. But there's a situation. There are several news vans outside, and parents are complaining. We might need to arrange alternate pickup for her. The reality of their situation crashed back. This wasn't just about her. It was affecting Sophia, her education, her safety. I'll figure something out, Elena said, ending the call. Marcus was already on his phone. I'll send a car, discreet, unmarked. They can bring her home or anywhere else you feel is safe. I can't keep accepting your help. You saved my life. You've made me question everything about how my family's business operates. You've started something that might actually lead to change. The least I can do is ensure your daughter gets home safely from school. Elena wanted to refuse, but Sophia's safety came first. She nodded, and Marcus made the arrangements. The board meeting is Tuesday. If you agree to the position, it would help to have you there, to have them hear from someone who's lived the reality of what our policies create. They won't listen to me. They will if you're the chief medical advisor. I haven't accepted, but you're considering it. She was, despite every instinct telling her not to trust the Whitmores, not to enter their world. But she thought about Sophia, about the thousands of other children with asthma who couldn't afford their medications, about the physicians driven from medicine by systemic failures, about the patients dying from rationing medications that cost pennies to produce. If I do this, she said slowly, I do it my way. No corporate spin, no PR management, no sanitizing the truth. I tell the board exactly what their policies cost in human terms. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. And I want Isabella there. If she's been secretly funding insulin for children, she should be part of this. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. She'll be thrilled. She's been wanting to confront Dad for years, but never had the courage. You've given her that. I haven't given anyone anything. I just did my job. You did the right thing. In a world that punishes people for doing the right thing, that's revolutionary. 3 months later, Dr. Elena Castillo walked into the Whitmore Pharmaceuticals boardroom wearing scrubs. Her choice, her statement. The medical board had reinstated her license unanimously. Sophia's medications now arrived monthly. No questions asked, no copays required. But more importantly, the Whitmore Medical Justice Initiative had passed by a single vote. The first batch of repriced medications would hit pharmacies next week. Insulin at cost plus 10%, asthma medications at prices families could actually afford. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Elena had learned that sometimes revolution came not through grand gestures, but through one person refusing to remain invisible, one moment of courage rippling outward until it became unstoppable change. At home that evening, Sophia asked, "Mom, do you think you would have done it differently if you'd known what would happen?" Elena watched her daughter breathe easily, freely for years. "I would have done exactly the same thing, mija. Sometimes saving one life saves thousands." The medical alert bracelet still caught the light on her wrist, but now it read simply, Dr. Elena Castillo, Chief Medical Advisor. Some identities once reclaimed could never be taken away again. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel.